The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, or SWIFT, provides financial messaging services to some 11,000 banks around the world. It's not a company, but rather a cooperative organization that arose to replace an outdated technology. Its powerful network has made it a crucial part of the global financial system. The Wikipedia page on this organization is quite comprehensive, so we have to go deeper. In this video, I want to write about SWIFT's unusual place in the financial world and what it means to lose access to it. SWIFT helps enable something called correspondent banking, or co-banking. This is where banks hold deposits and provide payment services for other banks. Local banks without distant branches would ally with other banks and communicate via post. No money is sent between these various banks, just information about certain transactions so that checks can be cashed and money withdrawn. SWIFT is a postman, like WhatsApp for banks and other financial institutions. Each bank has a public SWIFT code so that funds can be sent there without mistake, and there are 100 plus standard formats for different financial services. For instance, the most commonly used one, the MT-103, which instructs a transfer of funds between customers of financial institutions. So a guy with a Wells Fargo bank account in the United States can send money, in dollars or otherwise, to a guy with a Deutsche Bank account in Germany. Currently, SWIFT has signed up over 11,000 financial institutions across 200 plus areas. In 2020, the system averaged nearly 40 million messages a day and sent 9.5 billion messages in total. Like I said, early co-banking agreements were largely executed in paper via post. In the late 1840s, the development of the electrical telegraph allowed for much faster communications between distant markets. For instance, the first transatlantic submarine cable in 1866 allowed for deeper integration of stock prices between the New York and London stock markets. Long-distance connections evolved into national networks, which then became global. By the end of the 1800s, distant banks from Australia to Europe to America were working with one another. A global economy had started to emerge. Capital flows were unrestricted and reached new heights. But this brief period ended with the two world wars, restricting capital markets to just their borders. The interwar period between the two world wars saw the implementation of the typewriter keyboard and the first teleprinter exchanges, or telex, networks. The telex was a privileged teleprinter network that allowed for back-and-forth text messaging. It emerged first in Germany before World War II and quickly spread thereafter. Banks, stock exchanges, and other financial institutions were some of the service's first adopters. The quote-unquote wires, as it was called back then, quickly replaced the telegraph for business subscribers. By 1957, it had some 30,000 subscribers in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. By the 1970s, it had an estimated 1 million users all over the world. The system worked surprisingly all right. However, there were many fundamental limitations, and they interfered with the efficiency of doing business. First and foremost had to do with authentication. Telex sent messages via public telegraph and telephone networks, which were not secure. Complicated authentication procedures had to be done in order to ensure security. These were based on manually calculated test keys, which took an increasing amount of time. There also was no standardized format for the messages being sent. This meant that people sent whatever they thought was necessary to complete a transaction. Likewise, they had to interpret the same too, making the whole thing error-prone. This all meant that the whole process was pretty slow. The network can only send about 8 bytes a second, and correspondents needed to exchange an average of 10 messages per transaction. With hundreds or even thousands of messages being sent each day, this was no way for a modern bank to operate. A number of international banks first started building their own networks. US-based Citibank would be the first with their machine-readable telegraphic input, or MARTI. MARTI was a proprietary network. Citibank and its supporters attempted to impose its adoption across the industry, which concerned other banks. In 1970, 68 banks in Europe and the United States founded the International Message Switching Project, or MSP. MSP would eventually become SWIFT in 1973, established in Brussels. 239 banks from 15 countries made up the founding members, and the first message went out in May 1977. That same year, Marty closed down, having overplayed its hand and losing out to SWIFT's cooperative value proposition. The next 20 years saw SWIFT's broad adoption for high-value financial transactions across international borders. The world sent $140 trillion worth of cross-border transmissions in 2020. Some 90% of that were initiated via SWIFT. And despite a number of SWIFT affairs in recent years, it has retained that position in the industry. It's a network built up over the span of 50 years and sits on banking habits going back a century. SWIFT continues to modernize today as it faces competitors in certain areas of its businesses. This includes private companies offering remittance services like US-based Remitly and Taiwan-based EMQ. EMQ was the reason why I started researching this video in the first place. Sending money abroad with SWIFT works well for banks and big businesses, but is sort of overkill for working individuals and smaller companies. SWIFT charges you $200,000 at the start to connect to the network, and then costs another $10,000 each year. This has opened up a lot of room for players in the small remittances space. Crypto also offers a competing service. I feel I have to mention it, otherwise I'll get some angry comments. Ripple is probably your best bet. It is right now the 6th largest cryptocurrency by market cap. Other competitors include national networks that offer correspondent banking services like China's CIPS, which launched in 2015 and stands for Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. In 2016, CIPS connected itself to the SWIFT network when it signed a Memorandum of Understanding. Despite this, the organization's focus is on facilitating cross-border RMB business, mostly for trade, rather than providing financial messaging services. The internationalization of RMB itself is constrained by its strict capital controls imposed from Beijing. After 2014, both the United States and Europe publicly mulled the idea of taking Russia off the SWIFT network because of the Crimea thing. SWIFT objected to being singled out and highlighted its place as a global, neutral financial messaging provider. Removal never actually happened back then, but the country's central bank governor quickly called for an alternative. That would be SPFS, which stands for System for Transfer of Financial Messages, and launched in 2014. More on this one later. So competitors abound, and yes, they are growing. But the reality of it is that, like WeChat, WhatsApp, or any other messenger, SWIFT's messaging network is a critical tool that is hard to wean off of. Countries have been sanctioning each other ever since Pericles of Athens sanctioned the Megarians back in 432 BC. Whether they work or not is a different matter, but SWIFT's network has given it a power that other countries have wanted to tap. In the 1990s, broad, comprehensive UN sanctions imposed on Iraq after the first Gulf War inflicted devastating pain on the civilian population, ordinary Iraqis rather than regime elites. Economists, human rights advocates, and policymakers argued that these wide-ranging sanctions failed because it deflected criticism from the Iraqi government while simultaneously starving any domestic opposition of necessary funds. Thus, policymakers looked for more humane ways to apply such sanctions. These financial smart sanctions, as they are so called, include the freezing of financial assets, restricting the activity of diplomats, and refusing debt rescheduling. They supposedly work better since they target the financial and government elite. At the time, the US was intensifying financial sanctions against Iran for its nuclear program. What started in 2007 with freezing the assets of the country's 4th largest bank would eventually culminate 5 years later with its removal from SWIFT, the only time it's happened up until now. A representative of the Obama administration said at the time, "We have been able to move away from clunky and heavy-handed instruments of economic power. Sanctions that focus on bad actors within the financial sector are far more precise and far more effective than traditional trade sanctions. And the trade restrictions that we continue to employ today are also smarter and more surgical, targeting specific classes of products rather than cutting off entire economies." People envision smart sanctions as being like some sort of clean scalpel, kind of like drone strikes. But it's hard to say that that was the case for Iran. Banking and finance makes up less than 3% of the Iranian economy, so the costs ultimately fall on the shoulders of ordinary Iranians. A lack of reliable data has made it difficult to project the Iranian economy since the revolution. However, I managed to dig up an interesting paper that argued that the sanctions cost Iran about 16% of its total economy. GDP decreased by 75.5 billion USD the first year of the sanctions. Half of its oil exports and 30% of its exports overall vanished. 6,000 production enterprises, 67% of the economy, fell into financial distress. From 2012 to 2015, the sanctions cumulatively cost Iran an amount equal to two-thirds of its entire economy, a cost roughly comparative to how the US experienced the global financial crisis of 2009. The Iranian business community resorted to a variety of workarounds to deal with the sudden disconnect. This includes accepting hard assets like gold and the U-turn scheme loophole, which allowed foreigners to buy Iranian oil with dollars. But these options weren't available to everyone. During the 2015 JCPOA negotiations between Iran and the United States, a return to the SWIFT system was a key carrot. The Trump government, however, pulled back out, and that fell off the table. The Iranian economy hasn't much recovered. Interestingly enough, a few banks in Europe set up an alternate system for conducting non-US dollar transactions with Iran outside of oil and gas. INSTEX stands for Instrument in Support of Trade Exchanges and is mostly for buying medicines, pistachios, and carpets. It has had little impact overall other than being a curiosity. The Iranian situation served as a teaching moment for the Russian Federation, which relies on SWIFT to coordinate payments for its billions of dollars of hydrocarbon sales. Economic forecasts back in 2014 predicted that a SWIFT cutoff in Russia would cost the country at least 5% of its GDP. Their judgment concluded that the lack of a timely alternative to SWIFT made Iran unusually vulnerable, a situation to be avoided. Thus, the SPFS system today runs in parallel with SWIFT and acts as a way to receive SWIFT messages in case a removal was to ever happen. As of 2018, 355 Russian banks are connected to SPFS. That number has since grown to some 400, including a few foreign banks like Unicredit and Deutsche Bank. The exact number isn't clear. I haven't found concrete documentation of how widely used the service is domestically. In 2020, the system sent about 13 million messages. Annually or daily, it's not quite clear, and has 20% share of the domestic market. Russian officials continue to hawk SPFS abroad, but foreign bank adoption outside of the United States and Germany are limited, and it still has some technical limitations. Messages are limited to 20 kilobytes, and it only works during normal business hours. Considering the alternative's immaturity and lack of competitiveness, a SWIFT removal will still cut all international transactions, and in doing so trigger massive capital outflows and currency volatility, likely the Iran situation all over again. In other areas, the country has built up a parallel credit card clearing system within its own borders. MIR, which means world, has 73 million issued bank cards and 24% share of the market. It's standard issue for pensioners, public sector employees, and other public funds. Again, however, MIR is not easily accepted abroad. Some co-brand deals have been done with China's UnionPay and the Japanese JCB, but that's about it. This part is less of an issue, however. I don't see another global alternative to SWIFT coming to use anytime soon, though the effects of its removal can be ameliorated in the medium term. So long as banks still matter in the global scheme of things, so will SWIFT. That being said, I don't think people should see SWIFT as the first tool to impose punishments. It leads people to look for alternatives, and that is where we get the concerns about the de-dollarization of the financial system. Rather, such things should be implemented, to steal a Leninist term, as part of a united front. You need to deal with the countries buying all that energy, rather than the channel through which they pay for it. It maintains the network's strength. Regardless, losing SWIFT will have great economic impact, even with the existence of a backup. No more smart targeting here. Such a message will be keenly felt throughout an entire country and its people. Hopefully such a punishment will only need be temporary. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for the newsletter, and I'll see you guys next time.